I do have the honor of chairing the Natural Resources Committee, which is really, I guess, in a way, kind of interesting because when I was first elected in my first term, I served on the Natural Resources Committee, and then the next 12 years, I served on the Rules Committee, although my responsibility on the Rules Committee largely was dealing with issues that came out of the Natural Resources Committee. So I kind of kept a finger in what was going on, and I also kept my seniority on the Natural Resources Committee. So 2 years ago, when Don Young was having some issues and he decided not to seek the ranking member slot, it obviously opened it up, and my seniority was such that I said, I think I have an interest in that, and my colleagues, I thanked them very much, said you will be the right guy for the ranking member, and lo and behold, after the election of 2012, here I am the chairman. So I have served a grand total of 3 terms on this committee, and now I'm the chairman. That's I have some of my colleagues say we're trying, we're going to try to replicate the way that you move up very quickly in the hierarchy. Well, at any rate, I wanted to serve on the Natural Resources Committee for a number of reasons when I was first elected, not the least of which is the jurisdiction of that committee has broad jurisdiction over all of our public lands, and where I live, that public lands is largely agriculture, national forests, national parks, and so forth. But it also, as you know, has jurisdiction over the OCS, and because it has jurisdiction over the OCS, has jurisdiction over activities on the OCS, and that principal activity going on now and in the future, in my view, is energy related. So this looked like a great challenge, and I look forward to working with all of you that are associated with those industries. Listen, there's no question about it. We have some tremendous challenges in this country. Everybody knows about the fiscal health in our country, and I firmly believe that we as Republicans are going to deal with that. That means we're going to deal with the issues of entitlements, because if we don't do this, America as we know it is simply not going to be there for our kids and grandkids. We all know that, and I think that Chairman Paul Ryan, another Wisconsinite, is going to take the lead on that, and I think that is a very positive step. It's going to be a challenge. I'm not going to say it's easy. So I just wanted to set that aside to say that those of us that are in leadership now are certainly going to try to do what we think is right for the country long term. With that in mind, we need to look then at our energy sources and how we are dealing with energy in this country. We, as Republicans in the minority, developed an all-of-the-above energy plan. I personally believe that we should have whatever energy source that we could possibly have. Our portfolio should be as diverse as it can possibly be, because I think it's in the best interest of us to have those options. Always recognizing that ultimately the market will make a decision which energy source is going to be the one that prevails. But we should embrace all of those that we possibly can. So to that extent, it to me is absolutely foolish as a policy specifically of this administration to ignore broadly fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and oil. It doesn't make any sense because the abundance of those around the world is so huge, and technology seems to get better all the time to discover it and to use it. And so it seems to me it's in our best interest to have as diverse a portfolio, but do not ignore what we have such a great abundance of, and that's fossil fuels in this country. And to that end, and why this committee I think is very important in the long term, is that I'm not going to say all of the reserves in the future are on public lands, but a great deal of them are on public lands. And so this committee has the jurisdiction on that, and we are going to be as aggressive as we possibly can to try to promote that idea. But this administration, by its actions, and let me say this: this is something that I have observed virtually from day one since we took majority. Actually, I should say that when President Obama was elected and his administration took office, and I don't say this lightly, but I have said on a number of times, actions speak louder than words as this president talks about energy. And I dare say that when he says something, his actions are 180 degrees different. I'm not saying 90 degrees or 35 degrees or 45 degrees. I'm saying 180 degrees difference. And probably the one case in point that is more, that brings the point home more than anything else was his widely acclaimed article in the Wall Street Journal about a month ago talking about deregulation so that we can, try to promote business in this country. In other words, just let the entrepreneurs go by reducing regulations. But what he didn't say, obviously, in the article is 1 or 2 days before that, he suspended a mining permit that was in place in West Virginia on mining. Only 2 days before that. Now, it just boggles the mind. So you start looking at those sort of things, and like I say, I don't say it lightly, but I dare say on every case, he's 180 degrees difference on what he says and what his actions are. So consider what this president has done just since he has taken office. They have withdrawn oil and natural gas leases in the Intermountain West. That was in something like March of 2009. They've withdrawn oil shale leases in Colorado. They have imposed a de facto moratorium on the Gulf, although just this week they let the first deep water permit go through. They have placed huge portions over the OCS offshore, and they've locked up millions of acres of all types of energy production, including renewables, on public lands. Now, that's just what they've done already. This is not what some of the proposals that they are trying to do, because what they're trying to do now is to impose restrictions on hydraulic fracturing on public lands. That has, as you know, that has been typically a practice that has been regulated by the states for well over 50 years, and here they are going to focus in only on public lands. That process is in order. But it is not only subjected to just oil and gas regulations. They're new regulations that they're trying to promote on mining regulations. They admit in their own figures would lay off cost thousands of people and halt mining production in 22 states. These are just proposals that they're trying to promulgate right now. But they're not stopping there. They have an oceans policy where they developed a top-down ocean policy of spatial planning in the oceans. And I'll tell you, this can go far, far beyond the oceans, because when I was first elected in 94, there was an issue in the Northwest, principally in the Northwest, called ice bump, and I'm sorry, I do not know what the acronym stands for, but it is regulation of waters in the western part of the United States. It was supposed to be a wonderful thing, take an inventory, and all of a sudden some of those that were affected found out how it would affect their planning, because you're dealing with the source of water. The source of water in the western part of the United States is very, very important. So when you look at what the president is trying to do with spatial planning in the ocean, it is all waters leading into the ocean. Now, just think about that. If you are developing a policy on ocean planning and regulating that and everything that rolls into the ocean, you are talking about virtually every river that comes from the United States into the ocean potentially being regulated by this planning. What would that do? I mean, listen, I know what it could do to my area with the Columbia River and the Snake River, but can you imagine what it would do with the Mississippi River and the Ohio River right through the heart of our country with this potential? And that's the way that these regulations are potentially planned. Of course, they say, no, never happened. Well, all of you that deal with regulations, it's the unintended consequences that lead to all the bad issues, and that's where they potentially could go on this. So it's not only focused on energy; it is very, very broad. But let's get back to energy, and let's go back a little bit in time. If you remember in 2008 when gas prices spiked up over $4 a gallon, and by the way, we all know that ultimately 2008 was a lousy year for Republicans. We don't have to say that, in this group. My God, I didn't like 2006 particularly. I certainly didn't like 2008. But even then, if you recall, when we broke after July and gas prices were spiking, a few of my colleagues, started going to the floor, even though the Congress was out. And we got a great deal of publicity because we were talking about let's stay there and address the energy issues. And so we were on the floor with no cameras, and yet that became the news. And at the end of the day, if you recall, the American people said, wow, $4 a gallon of gasoline, what are we going to do about it? And then we found out, the American people found out we had these tremendous amount of reserves, not only on the OCS and Alaska and the Intermountain West, but they were asking, why aren't we drilling? And that's where that drill, baby, drill idea came in, which I still embrace, as I might add. So even though 2008 from a political standpoint was a lousy year, from a policy standpoint, the American people woke up. to the idea that we need to utilize the resources that we have right now. So in August of 2008, the President lifted his moratorium, which the executive moratorium that that Bush 1 had put into place. And at the end of the year 2008, Congress ended their moratorium, and so essentially at the end of 2008, there is no moratorium at all, or moratoria, I should say, at all, on any place on the OCS. So in theory then, anybody that wanted to go out, whether on the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific Ocean, if they thought there was oil and gas, they would be subjected to being able to have a lease to make that expiration. So we come into the President's term, and the President made a big announcement, and I forget the exact date, but he says, we are going to open up areas, for exploration. At the same time, he closed down all of the Pacific coast. He closed down part of Alaska explorations, and he closed down the eastern Gulf Shore, and he closed down everything on the Atlantic except some lands off Virginia. Now that was his opening up. It was just, that's the 180-degree difference that I'm telling you about, because it's exactly opposite of what he said. So we are essentially back to 2008 areas where we have a moratorium, except it's only the executive moratorium right now and not anything congressional. So so that's part of the action speaks louder than words. And I think that what we are going to do on the committee is that we are going to really probe into this. By the way, it starts today. Secretary Salazar is coming in front of my committee on the budget issues. Obviously, we might have an interest in other things other than dollars and cents, but we're certainly going to talk about his policies in that regard. So here we are now. Gasoline prices starting to rise again. The unrest in the Middle East is something that nobody in their right mind could predict with any certainty at all, except one thing. The unrest in the Middle East is going to cause the price of energy to go up. And there's no question about that. And what does that do to our economy when we're trying to, our economy is trying to recover, energy being such an integral part of it? It will probably, in all likelihood, slow it down. So what are the solutions? The solutions are obvious. The solutions are to utilize the resources we have in this country. But I dare say that I doubt if that after this election the President woke up and when he looked at all the committee chairmen, he says, gee, I see Doc Hastings is now the chairman of this committee and he has jurisdiction on public lands. I doubt that he had an epiphany, said, I think that we ought to open up all these lands because I know he's going to talk about that. No, I don't think that's going to happen. We're probably election away, frankly, from that happening. But I'll tell you this: we are going to talk about that all the time. We are going to expose all of what I say, the 180-degree differences on a regular basis. You can get that, by the way, if you go to our website. I can't tell the media to pick it all up, but it's going to be exposed, and we'll to all of you that are involved in those industries, if you want to plagiarize that, go right ahead. Be my guest. It's public policy. So that's kind of where we are, and I think the best thing that we could be doing is utilize this. And I have been telling those in the industry, by the way, and I think all Americans should be talking about this. While it's important to our economy, and nobody can argue about that. I mean, we have a very robust economy. We've got to get goods and products to markets, and that takes energy, and we have to develop. I mean, all of it. We all know all of that. But I think this becomes a national security issue more and more when you look at what's happening in the Middle East. I remember the gas lines in the 70s when OPEC turned off the spigot. And OPEC still controls about 45% of the world market. And let's face it, oil is a worldwide commodity, and it's going to go someplace. It's going to go wherever the market is. But if OPEC decides to turn off the spigot or something causes that, I mean, worst case, let's hope that doesn't happen, but we know the unrest right now in Libya, and nobody knows what that's going to happen. What happens if that happens in Saudi Arabia? Where and that regime is probably more tyrannical than some of the other ones out there. But what happens if that spreads throughout the Middle East where all of those resources are? What does that do to us when we're not utilizing, and it takes time for us to build up our infrastructure so that we can produce our own energy? So that's why we need to do it as quickly as possible. And I think the American people, my guess is this, and I've been saying this now for the last month, To the extent that gas prices rise, and all the experts tell me it's going to rise, if for no other reason you get into the tourist season, it always rises because the demand is higher. But right now it's rising at a time, the experts tell me, because it's simply because of the uncertainty of the market. Now you start adding more demand to that and the uncertainty of the market, the probability that we get to $4 or maybe even $5 a gallon gasoline is probably real. That, in a way, in a bad way, that is probably good, because American people will demand action of their government. And you know, to the extent that we can be ahead of that, saying we need to be as energy independent as we possibly can be, I think that's good. That's an opportunity that we need to take advantage of. And I can tell you, from the standpoint of my responsibility on this committee, that's what we're going to talk about. There's not hardly a press release that we don't send out in some way that makes reference to national security issues. And I think the American people instinctively understand that. That's one of the things I think that makes America a bit exceptional, is they understand that we need to make sure that we maintain what we have, and that makes our country what it is. So there's a lot of challenges, and again, I'm not under any illusions that this president is going to change his mind, or this administration is going to change his mind, but we certainly look forward to having the administration up in front of us to explain why they're doing those things, and to the extent they're way off base, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it over and over.